We'll hear from the chairs and rankings of the Homeland Security subcommittees, followed by statements from any other conferees. Given the tight time frame to complete our work, let's begin. The 35-day government shutdown that ended last Friday inflicted serious harm on families, businesses, communities, and the national economy. We can all agree that we must do everything we can to prevent another unnecessary and destructive government shutdown. In the next 16 days, our task is clear: finalizing appropriations legislation that responsibly funds much of the federal government, everything from our national parks to border security, except Homeland Security. We are very close to agreement on the other 6 appropriation bills. While we have some differences on disaster relief and recovery, I believe we can come to a speedy agreement there as well. Clearly, the bulk of our work will focus on Homeland Security. Along with my Democratic colleagues, I'm ready to work in good faith to write a Department of Homeland Security bill that funds smart, effective border security. In doing so, we will expand on the $1.6 billion for border security-related programs that House Democrats have already passed in the last few weeks in other appropriation bills. That includes improvements to ports of entry to improve security and facilitate both legal entries and trade, more immigration judges to reduce the backlog in processing immigration cases, assistance to Central American countries to help alleviate the situation in those countries. To further secure the border, we should focus on proven solutions like equipment at ports of entry to detect drugs and new technology between ports of entry to detect unauthorized crossings, more aircraft and vessels to help Homeland Security agencies patrol our land borders and U.S. waters, resources to meet the unique humanitarian needs of migrants, especially children and families. Smart border security is not overly reliant on physical barriers, which the Trump administration had failed to demonstrate are cost-effective compared to better technology and more personnel. It is also important to recognize that in addition to border security, the Homeland Security bill includes other key pieces of our nation's security platform, including the Coast Guard, Transportation Security Administration, and FEMA. Every dollar spent on ineffective proposal means one less dollar invested in measures that actually keep us safe. I know that the American people are counting on us to come to a reasonable and responsible solution. We are appropriators, and consistent with the proud tradition of our committees, I'm confident that we will be able to reach a compromise. I hope that all stakeholders, including the President, will work in good faith to support us as we carry out our responsibilities. Together, we can secure our border and uphold our values. And I would now like to recognize my very good friend, Chairman Shelby, for his statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For 35 days, Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate pledged that negotiations on border security would occur once the government was reopened. With a 3-week continuing resolution in place, today we begin in earnest a negotiation to resolve our differences on this critical issue. Thus far, all sides seem to agree that border security is important. I think that's a good start, but we cannot end there. These negotiations, I think, must not end with platitudes or promises. They must yield results that actually secure the border. I think what is necessary to accomplish this goal, what is? Our Border Patrol professionals, those on the front lines, tell us that a comprehensive approach is necessary. An approach that includes technology, infrastructure, personnel, and physical barriers. Smart technology is a part of a comprehensive solution, but it's not the only solution in and of itself. Cameras, sensors, drones, and other smart technology highlight the gaps and vulnerabilities along our long border. In short, they provide a greater awareness of where our insecurities lie. But smart technology alone does not actually stop anyone from crossing into the U.S. illegally. And if that is happening, our borders are not secure. Our Border Patrol tells us that they need physical barriers to help them do their job, not from coast to coast, but strategically placed where traffic is highest. Combined with technology, manpower, and other infrastructure, these strategic barriers comprise a comprehensive solution that is capable of fully securing the border. It is a common sense, I believe, all of the above solution to a problem that both parties have said for years we have to fix. Stepping back just for a moment, it's unfortunate that this issue has become so politicized. That has not always been the case, even up until pretty recently. Just last May, the Senate Appropriations Committee passed a Homeland Security spending bill that included money for physical barriers by a vote of 26-5. There was no partisan surrounding arguments during that vote. The committee simply decided on a bipartisan basis to increase funding for a project that Congress had funded the previous year. Since that time, the President has increased his funding request based on the advice of our border security professionals on the ground. I hope we heed the guidance of these professionals as our negotiations proceed. As appropriators, all of us here, we know how to work together on a bipartisan basis to solve problems. That's what we've done for the majority, 3/4 of the funding bills this year for the first time in years. That is what the American people, I think, expect of us now. So I hope these negotiations yield results. And I hope that by reaching a compromise here, we will set a tone of bipartisanship again for the appropriations cycle ahead of us. Chairman Loy, Vice Chairman Leahy, Ranking Member Granger, and all members of this committee, I look forward to working with you. But I must stress that as long as we remain polarized, we will never resolve our differences on this critical issue that we owe to the American people. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And next, I'm pleased to yield to the Ranking Member Granger.
Thank you, Mrs. Lowy. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very important and really a unique charge in front of us today. We have the opportunity, because approximately 2.5 weeks, to come up with an agreement to secure our border, pass it through both the House and the Senate, and get it to the President's desk for a signature. While both the House and the Senate produced Homeland Security appropriations bills last year, they didn't receive a vote in either chamber, and that's what's led us to the situation we find ourselves in today. Democrats said they would not negotiate a border security until the government was reopened. The government is now open, and the negotiations start now. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to reach agreement in support of the things experts on the border have said they need in order to secure our homeland and address the crisis we face. In particular, I'm hopeful that this conference will reach agreement in support of some important provisions, such as increased funding for technology and canines and personnel to help stop the flow of illegal drugs, weapons, and other contraband. The hiring of additional border agents, law enforcement, and staff to help the Border Patrol carry out their mission. Resources to implement smart technology and barriers where Border Patrol experts have said they would be most impactful. money to support our immigration court system, including hiring new immigration judge teams to reduce the immigration court backlog, and funding for humanitarian assistance, medical support, and temporary housing for the most vulnerable, like women and children, who are victims of human trafficking. Now that the government's reopened, I've resubmitted my request to visit the border as soon as possible so we can hear directly from those on the ground. I've been to the border more times than I can count. I've talked to these families who are risking their lives and the lives of their children to come here to the United States. I've heard the stories of Americans whose family members' lives were cut short due to drugs and bad actors who seek to exploit our immigration system. I think we all owe it to all of these families to do something about this crisis, and we also owe it to the American people to get this right and get it done on time. Each of us was elected by our constituents to find solutions to the challenges we face, and I'm hopeful we can work together to do just that. But hard work starts today, and I'm honored to be leading the negotiations for the House Republicans. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And I'm very pleased to yield to my friend, the Vice Chair Leahy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank you, and I thank Ms. Granger, and I thank Senator Shelby for your comments. I think if several of us in here in both parties could just be let alone, we could get this solved very quickly. I mean, we all are glad the 35-day shutdown has come to an end. We're glad the Appropriations Committee can get to work, try to come up with something that makes sense for all the American people. We can reach a bipartisan agreement, fund our government, secure our country and our borders. But our choice of how to allocate American taxpayer money must be grounded in reality. We need to address problems with solutions rooted in facts, not merely rooted in campaign rhetoric. We need solutions that honor America and honor our American values and who we are as a nation. We all support border security. Everybody, in fact, everybody, certainly on our side, has voted, as you all have, for border security. We'll continue to support border security, but we're for smart border security. In fiscal year 2018, we Democrats supported $22.5 billion related to border security and immigration enforcement. Investments in our ports of entry, inspection equipment to detect illicit contraband coming through our ports of entry. And I've seen how well that's worked on the border. Aircraft to monitor our sprawling border from above, quickly respond to emergencies, video surveillance systems, radar systems to detect movement in remote locations, assistance to Central America to address the root problems causing people to flee their countries and come to America. And immigration judges, a great shortage there to process asylum cases. Now, these are smart use of the taxpayer dollars. These are effective solutions I think all Republicans and all Democrats should be able to agree on. And I think if we look to areas of agreement, we can get to a package that works for both our committees and the American people. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee, I've been proud to serve almost all the time I've been in the Senate Appropriations Committee. I've seen the House and Senate Appropriations Committees come together to solve tough problems through hard work, compromise, and bipartisanship. And this should be no different. And rarely has the work of our Appropriations Committee been watched as closely as today. The American people want us to get our job done. The Constitution says in Article 1, Section 9, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. That's our responsibility. We don't cede it to any other branch of government. So I am delighted to work with my longtime friend, Chairman Shelby, Chairwoman Lowy, who we've known for years, Ranking Member Granger. I've worked with all of you in the past in different matters. We've come together. And all of the conferees here, we can reach an agreement for the American people. We must reach an agreement for the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now we will hear from the Homeland Security Subcommittee chairs and ranking members. Chairwoman Roybal-Allard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am pleased we are able to get to work on finalizing a full-year funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. The proposal I presented will be the basis for the House Majority position for this conference. Based on a holistic analysis of the country's most acute vulnerabilities, the proposal is balanced across the mission areas of the department. It advances a smart and strong border security posture while staying true to our core values as Americans. Our responsibility is to prioritize funding for the department within our funding allocation. Nothing can be considered in a vacuum. More funding for one priority means less for others. The issue is not only that the President is proposing to spend $5.7 billion on border barriers. It is that there are serious Homeland Security vulnerabilities for which we will have no funding if the President gets his request. My proposal avoids this imbalance by including funding to address those vulnerabilities. The vast majority of drug interdictions occur at the ports of entry, not between the ports. That is why my proposal funds 1,000 additional customs officers at the ports of entry to facilitate trade and travel and to interdict smuggled drugs and other contraband. It pays for new imaging technology at the land ports of entry to ensure all commercial and passenger vehicles are scanned for drugs and other contraband prior to entering our country. And it will help ensure more vehicles leaving the country are scanned for smuggled weapons and the proceeds of drug sales. It makes large investments in reducing the backlog of critical repair and improvement needs at Border Patrol stations and ports of entry. Between the ports of entry, it provides significant investments in cutting-edge border security technology to improve situational awareness and operational control. Technology investments are also made at mail processing facilities to interdict fentanyl and other opioids shipped through the international mail. Significant new investments are also made in the CBP and Coast Guard fleets of aircraft and vessels. This includes the procurement of the first Coast Guard heavy icebreaker since the 1970s. There has been a lot of inaccurate rhetoric about a security crisis at the southern border, which can be addressed only by spending $5.7 billion for new miles of border barriers. The numbers of migrants crossing our southwest border are at historic lows. The only crisis at the border has been a humanitarian one due to DHS's inability to care for the immigrants' families and unaccompanied children properly. My proposal includes much-needed humanitarian aid and improved facilities for migrants taken into CBP custody to help prevent unnecessary death and health problems. My proposal provides a larger investment in alternatives to detention and family case management and a bigger focus on detention facility inspections and health care services. Also, smart investments are made in the department's overarching mission, including the TSA, Secret Service, FEMA, critical cyber and physical infrastructure, and support for state and local governments to prepare and respond to disasters of every kind. Between fiscal years 2007 and 2018, Congress appropriated more than $8.7 billion for border security fencing, infrastructure, and technology, with some of the highest funding years occurring during Democratic control of the House. With this proposal, Democrats are once again supporting strong border security as an essential component of Homeland Security. Border security, however, is more than physical barriers, and Homeland Security is more than border security. My proposal strikes a balance between a strong Homeland Security posture without compromising America's core values. Thank you.
Chair Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's wonderful to be here with you and some of my friends from the House side, serving with many of you. Very pleased to be joining you. I'm happy to be here also with my chairman, Chairman Shelby, who's done an outstanding job on the committee, along with Vice Chairman Leahy. I would like to give a shout out to Ranking Member Granger. We've been longtime friends and colleagues for many years. It's great to have my partner here in the Senate, Senator Tester. We decided earlier today the two of us could work this out rather quickly, but working with our House, with our new counterparts, Ms. Roybal-Allard, and also the new ranking member, Mr. Fleischman. We're here to see if we can place the final very important piece to the puzzle of the FY19 appropriations process. I'm optimistic, and many of us have expressed optimism, that if we work hard and work together with mutual respect for one another, and with a sense of duty to achieve the job we've been sent here to do, we can deliver an outcome that illustrates the important role the legislative branch plays in providing for our country's priorities and avoids for the American people the unacceptable outcomes another lapse in appropriations would create. One of the proposals recently considered by the Senate is a solution that was built upon a strong foundation. Senator Tester and I laid that foundation last June when our bill advanced through the Senate Appropriations Committee on a broad bipartisan vote of 26-5. Of the senators seated on this conference committee, 6 of the 7 of us voted in favor for the Capito Tester bill. We are still working on Senator Durbin. Good luck, huh? But both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees embrace the idea that we produce legislation one time a year, and hopefully every year, that reflects very careful choices and compromises based on the most recent and accurate information that we have. That's what we're here to do today. Build on the work we've already done in a thoughtful and informed way. The situation at our border, as we've all acknowledged, has been changing. Both the data we receive and the law enforcement professionals we talk to are telling us that very fact over and over. To respond to these changes, they are asking us for increased investments across the spectrum of border security and immigration enforcement, more technology, more personnel, and more infrastructure, including physical barriers where it makes sense. Past investments that we have made have worked. They have caused illegal activity to shift to different parts of the border. We have a chance to choose a strong all-of-the-above strategy to keep pace with these changes. Making that choice should not be political. We also have to keep up with the other changes that the Department of Homeland Security faces, whether we're talking about maritime security, transportation security, cyber security, disaster relief, or the missions of the Secret Service. We appropriators are charged with making smart, up-to-the-date choices, and that's why the work of this conference committee, in my view, is so very important. It may be the last best chance we have during this process to apply the significant knowledge that we all have around these tables to make these important decisions. Some people say reaching an agreement is a steep mountain to climb, but I'm from the mountain state, and I embrace that. So to Chairman Lowy and Chairman Shelby, and the rest of the members of this committee, my message is simple. I'm ready to go to work with all of you to deliver a product that reflects the priorities of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the serious and thoughtful insight of those of us who have been chosen to this task. Thank you.
Thank you. Ranking Member Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman Shelby, thank you very much for being here today, and I welcome you and all of the Senate appropriators. Madam Chairman, thank you. Ms. Roybal-Allard, thank you so much. I look forward to working with you. The American people are watching. Each and every one of us are elected, some in congressional districts, some in statewide in your role as United States Senators. When I go into schools and I talk with school children, many times I'm asked questions about our great republic. And I always leave my conservative Republican philosophy at the door because in order to reach those students, I want to be able to explain what we're about in a way that is nonpartisan to honor our great republic. And I look around this room, I see a lot of friends, and I thank each and every one of you so far because we talk about where we want to go, and the tenor is so important, and I thank each and every one of you for your very civil tone. I think that's very important. But as we explain to the American people what we do, we are elected to our respective bodies, but we are selected to the Appropriations Committee. And that's a very special committee. Sometimes in the D.C. dialect, we forget that the American people may not understand our political speak. So that for everyone watching, the Appropriations Committee, as I have referred to time and time again, I believe is a problem solvers committee. Each and every one of us, in a very laudatory way, has an ideology. We believe in a framework, a way that government should work or should be structured. But the Appropriations Committee, so that the American people would know, or if I were in one of those schoolrooms, the children would know, is so critically important. Constitutionally, we are the committee basically that decides where we allocate our federal resources. Now, as we move from those committees, we actually have to get a vote in each respective body. And in our great republic, with divided government, with separated branches of power, the executive branch, the presidency, also has a role and a vote. Sometimes that's a very frustrating process. I can say right now we're in a bit of an impediment. But I really do believe in this great process, and I believe in my friends from both sides of the aisle and from both bodies today that we can reach an agreement so that the American people know there is tremendous common ground and agreement in a lot of these bills, not only in a bipartisan way among Republicans and Democrats, but in a bicameral way between our senators and our House members. I want to say this. I believe that we need a physical barrier. I want to be candid with my friends. I do think we need a wall, a physical barrier where the barrier works. But that's only one part of it. We need all of the above. We need technology. We need more border control agents. But the American people need to know, whether Republican or Democratic, House or Senate, we want and need a secure border. And that is very important. That is our duty, whether it's in the White House, in the House, or the Senate. So as we go through these negotiations, again, I'm so pleased by the tenor of the start of these negotiations. I realize that each and every one of us have opinions. The passions may be strong. But there's a lot of cynics out there. I've done a lot of media in the last few days, and a lot of naysayers. And sadly, there will always be. Historically, there have always been cynics, naysayers, and folks that say we can't get it done. But just think about how we can restore the American people's faith, not only in our two respective bodies, but in our great republic, if we can come together and work together and come up with a solution. That won't be the solution that I would draw. That probably is not the solution that each and every one of you all would draw. But it is the solution I think we can get there, that the American people can support, and that our great president can sign on and support and move past this. One last point. We are dealing with fiscal 2019, so that the American people know if it's tough now, in a few weeks, once we get past this, we are going to be going into a new fiscal year, a new budget year, 2020. With the draconian effects of the Budget Control Act. My good friend Senator Blunt, I heard him give an interview. We talked about going big. I think he's right. We need to go big. Debt ceiling, budget control. We've got to address these issues so that we can move forward in the future. The American people deserve it. The American people are watching. But for my small part, I will say this. I will negotiate. I will keep an open mind. I think most importantly, I will listen and I will pray. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank all the conferees and leadership for convening this important meeting today. As has been already pointed out, last week, after 35 days, we reopened the government. We ended it in a necessary and costly shutdown and got hundreds of thousands of folks across the country back to work. Last week, in my home state of Montana, after 35 days, 7,000 federal workers finally started getting paid. But the short-term bill that we passed started a clock on fulfilling a promise that we made to all the American people, that we will put a true end to the uncertainty that upended too many lives. If we don't get back to work and if we don't achieve a lasting solution, we'll end right back here where we started. Fortunately, this conference committee has the ability to devise solutions that will keep the government open and secure our borders and ports of entry. We need to find a balanced solution for border security. Last summer, Senator Capito and I wrote a bipartisan DHS bill that set aside more than $21 billion for border security and immigration enforcement. Was it perfect? Well, we'll tell you it was, but it probably wasn't. It showed that lawmakers can come together, however, and can compromise. That bill funded additional personnel for Customs and Border Protection and Coast Guard, the very people charged with securing our borders. It funded real border security technology and assets like helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, counter-narcotic scanners at the ports of entry, and funding to fight opioid and methamphetamine epidemic that continues to ravage our state and our country. A balanced approach to border security should be a roadmap, and many of the measures that we funded in the Senate bill can serve as a starting point as we work together to craft a deal that we all can agree on. We have to address the situation at our border, particularly the growing humanitarian crisis of families and children fleeing violence in Central America. We have to find cost-effective solutions to border security that actually work and that include using everything in the toolbox, including technology, aircraft, watercraft, and manpower. We have to beef up the security at our ports of entry, where the vast majority of drugs enter this country. We need a true cost-benefit analysis that takes into account the outsized expensive physical barriers versus technology and the enormously costly burden of eminent domain. We need to ensure that any investments that we don't make come at the expense of other Department of Homeland Security priorities like TSA or Coast Guard, grant funding for securing border communities, and the men and women in law enforcement who keep us safe. And we all need to do that without treating the American taxpayer like an ATM. I think it is clear by now that bipartisanship in Washington is rare, but it is not dead. We need to act like the co-equal branch of government that we are, and we've got a group here today that has a real shot at coming together to write a bill and send to the President's desk that secures our borders and addresses the humanitarian crisis and funds our government. The deal we reach here today probably won't be perfect. It probably isn't going to please everyone, but we were sent to Washington to work together and to improve our laws and keep this country safe, not to stand on the sidelines while Americans suffer. We certainly have a lot of work to do, so my suggestion is let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will now open discussion for any conferee wishing to make brief remarks.
Chairman.
Chairman. Who was first? Chairman Price.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to join colleagues, fellow House and Senate appropriators, to take on this task. I'm coming to the task as a former chairman of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee in the House. And the years that I served as chairman, 2007 to 2010, were critical years. During those years, colleagues may remember, Congress worked together to make bipartisan investments in border security and technology, which included hundreds of miles of pedestrian and vehicular fencing along our nation's southern border. As part of that effort, we required the department to provide careful segment-by-segment analysis, cost-benefit analysis, asking such questions: is this proposed barrier the most cost-effective way to secure the border at this point? How much measurable impact do we buy with one kind of investment versus another? We also required environmental impact studies, community impact studies, often required that a segment of barrier be relocated to protect a community college in one case, to deal with the disruption that ranchers, other landowners would otherwise suffer. Now, we're often asked, what has changed since those years? Well, a good bit has changed. First, conditions on the border have changed. Because of the work we did years ago, we've already built almost 700 miles of fencing on our nation's border. Whatever the president may say, it is far from an open border. Meanwhile, the number of undocumented migrants crossing our border or attempting to cross remain not at alarming highs, but at historic lows. Secondly, we also have a very different type of migrant, a very different mix of migrants coming to our country. In 2008, we had an influx of single migrants crossing the border looking for jobs and employment opportunities. Today, we're increasingly dealing with people who are fleeing humanitarian crises in Central America. They're actually proactively seeking out the Border Patrol. They're turning themselves in. A fence is irrelevant to their situation. Thirdly, there's a different mix of border security needs and available technologies, particularly regarding our port of entry operations, our Coast Guard operations. We must explore those thoroughly. Understanding that border security, as our subcommittee chairman has said, border security isn't just about barriers, and Homeland Security isn't just about border securities. We have a whole range of priorities that we must address. We've got to make some difficult trade-offs. We're obligated to operate under budget caps, after all. We can't have it all. We must make the difficult choices. And we've got to do this, I would hope, without resorting to emergency funding, without resorting to budgetary gimmicks. We need to maintain budget discipline. And whatever we invest in one item will take away from another. And we need to confront that honestly. So I look forward to working with colleagues to come up with an agreement that funds smart, effective solutions for border security, for Homeland Security, and that, of course, the bottom line is to keep our government open for business, our most fundamental responsibility. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think I'll read the names in the order of which I saw the hands so we can hear from as many of you as possible would like to speak. Senator Blunt, Congressman Graves, Senator Durbin, Congresswoman Lee, Senator Hoeven, Congressman Cuellar, Congressman Palazzo, Congressman Aguilar.
Thank you, Chairman. What I heard here of all the early presentations, just a great example of how much information members of the Appropriations Committee have. I think that's one of the reasons it's so important we figure out how to come to a conclusion here that's successful. That means a conclusion that ultimately the President will sign and becomes law. But what we did last year, in a good way, was we funded 75% of the government before the beginning of the fiscal year, like we're supposed to do. And when we saw that happen, I just think that produces a much better result than what we'd seen in the previous years, where at the end of the day, you have the two House leaders and the two Senate leaders and somebody from the White House trying to do everything after the fiscal year has already begun, afraid to share that information with anybody outside the room, because once you break the code, then everybody wants to know about everything, and that is just, nobody is well served by that. The leaders aren't well served by that. The country's not well served by that. Sending these big bills, one big bill to the president, nobody's served well by that. I do think that what we are able to do here in this conference, and by the way, remember how when we used to have conferences all the time instead of the rare, maybe once a year. I think we had one conference last year, maybe no conferences the year before. In this conference, to remind people that the Appropriation Committee really does matter. The years of information put together really matter as we try to reach a conclusion. Congressman Price mentioned the budget caps, current Budget Control Act. If we could do anything in this conference to get the top spending numbers for the year we're about to enter into. If we don't do that, we need to immediately turn around and go through this process again. Everybody knows the Budget Control Act caps, which would require an 11% cut in this year's defense spending number and a 9% cut in this year's non-defense discretionary number, will not be what happens at the end of the year. So when Mr. Fleischman mentioned, I talked about using this conference, let's at least consider the things we can do in this conference besides just get the rest of the government funded that helps us get our job done next year. There is a reason that the normal process works. It worked for 75% of the government funding this time. Our goal between now and September 30th should be to get it to work for 100% of the government funding. And I think this conference, more important than would sometimes be the case, not only because it's an incredibly important topic, but also we're setting a stage as to how the new Congress, controlled by House controlled by Democrats, a Republican controlled by Senate, Republicans controlling the Senate, a Republican president, how that new conference can or cannot function. This is our first real opportunity to show that we can do our job. And as almost everybody said, doing our job means, by definition, nobody gets everything they want. We've got to be sure that we are looking at that as the end result. We've got to figure out how to make this work. I think we can. And again, just listening to what everybody had to say and listening to the incredible knowledge that everybody brings to the table further exemplifies why this process needs to work the right way. That's what a conference committee is all about. I am pleased to be part of it. I think it's really important we produce a result. And if there are a couple of other problems right over the near horizon that we can deal with while we're dealing with funding the rest of the government, I'd encourage us to think about that too. And I think with the leadership at these two head tables, we can do that if we decide that's what we want to do. And I look forward to seeing what we could produce.
Thank you. Congressman Graves.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a delight to be with each of you. I think this is the right group to work through this tough issue, and it's a very difficult, it's a very dynamic issue set. This is not a binary decision for anyone, and if any group can tackle this, I know it's this group. I have heard today tremendous agreement. I feel like there is a good foundation to work off of. I have not heard anyone object to additional security on our border, southern border, nor any border. I have not heard anyone object to additional resources to secure our nation and our homeland, and those are great foundations of which to work off of. I suspect we might have some discussions about terminology and words we use, but whether it's deterrence, whether it's obstructions, whether it's walls, whether it's barriers, I think we all are here for a very narrow purpose and scope, and that is to provide the necessary resources to secure our homeland and to protect our citizens from illegal activity that may come through a porous border. So I'm very excited to be working with this group, Madam Chair, and but this is a good opportunity for us also, I believe, as two bodies to restore the trust with the American people. I think they're very frustrated with us, and rightfully so. This process has been broken. We have been through a very difficult phase. So I think there are 17 of us here that have an opportunity to restore that trust, and it probably begins with transparency. I think this should be a very transparent, very open process. The symbolism, quite frankly, of meeting in the basement of the U.S. Capitol is not good symbolism here, but at least it's open to the public, and that's a great step forward. That's a good faith effort. And so, Madam Chair, it's my hope that we will continue public meetings, that we won't just dismiss ourselves here today and let staff work out differences and not reappear again until the last hours of a frightful end of a week. In fact, I mean, we're adjourning as a House, and Madam Chair, I just pose a question to you if you might have a schedule for us and when we might meet again as a conference committee, because I think that's important, and also additionally, would that be public meetings as well? And I'd be happy to yield to the gentlelady from New York if you have something there you could share with us. I think it's important.
Thank you for your recommendations, and when I do have something to share, you could be sure I'll get back to you.
Well, thank you. I've heard senators say they're here to roll up their sleeves, and I am here as well. I have no plans to leave. tomorrow or Friday or Saturday. So, Madam Chair, if you were to call a meeting, I am ready to go to work. I think it's important that we demonstrate to the American people we're serious about this, that we're not going to wait until late next week to reconvene, or that private meetings and discussions are taking place. And then lastly, let me thank the chair for mentioning, I guess it was the chair of the committee, that you have a proposal. And might I ask when we might see that proposal, or when that would be made public to the American people? Again, in the spirit of transparency, it would be nice to know what the position is so we can all begin working on that as soon as possible. Be happy to yield to the lady.
Yeah, we're working on that proposal, finalizing it, and we will let you know exactly when we're finished with that.
Well, thank you. I think it's important because there's rumors around here, always rumors, that there's a draft of a proposal somewhere, and I believe it has been distributed as well. So maybe at some point you could confirm whether or not that draft proposal is something that is being considered, or is your proposal.
Well, I've outlined what is in that proposal, and then we're finishing the details of it right now.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I know there's a lot to do, but I'm grateful to be a part of this. Look forward to working with each and every one of you. And in the spirit of transparency, Madam Chair, I hope we have many meetings in open, in the public, and have great discussions together. Yield back.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be back with the Appropriations Committees of both the House and the Senate that I've been honored to serve on. I hope we'll make history here in two ways. I hope this will be the last conference committee ever called after a government shutdown. If we can add some provisions in our effort here to put an end to government shutdowns once and for all, count me in. I'm willing to sit down on a bipartisan basis and see if we can achieve that. Secondly, I hope we make history as appropriators. As I've said, it's been my honor to serve on the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. We are given requests by presidents of both political parties, and they want every darn penny of it and don't want any questions asked. But we're empowered and responsible under the Constitution to ask questions. And some of those questions lead to conclusions that perhaps, just perhaps, the president in his request is wrong, or at least needs to explain more to us. You remember what happened last year when the Trump administration asked us for barriers and fences for this fiscal year? They asked for a 20% increase in spending over the previous year, from $1.3 billion to $1.6 billion. 20% is a pretty healthy increase in this day and age in federal government. But we're now facing a new request that was handed to us in January the 6th by the president, and he's increased that request when it comes to fences and barriers, or what he might call a wall, all the way up to $5.7 billion. From $1.6 billion to $5.7 billion. It went from a 20% increase to a 300% increase. Is it time to ask a few questions about whether that money would be well spent, whether we need it for the challenges we face at the border, or whether there are other ways to keep us safe? I think that is our job. Secondly, the president has asked for 750 more border officers. Well, in his mind, responding to the crisis as he sees it, 750 more border officers may sound like not an unusual request. But look back in history and see what this committee's done. The president asked for 7,500 new border officers 2 years ago. He hired a company called Accenture to go find those new border officers. Do you know what the Inspector General of DHS has reported to us? They're paying Accenture a bounty of $44,000 for every new border officer. Starting pay for border officers, $52,000. So here is this incentive of $44,000 to Accenture to find the 7,500 new border officers. How are they doing? They found 33 so far. So when the president asked for 750 more, do we have a responsibility as appropriators to say, but what about the 7,500 we've already approved? You haven't filled those slots. I think those are things we ought to look at. When I had Mr. McAleenan, I mispronounced his name, Mr. McAleenan, who is a career professional at DHS, I asked him, blank check time, Mr. McAleenan, as head of Customs and Border Protection, where would you put the next dollar to keep our border safer? He said, in technology and personnel. I said, be specific. He said, well, when it comes to technology, there's something called a Z portal. A Z-portal is one of these non-invasive scanning X-ray devices that can look into vehicles and other things coming into the United States and see if the person driving is lying about what's inside. We can do it without opening the door of the truck. So how many of these Z-portal devices do we have? Enough to cover 98% of all rail cars coming into the United States, but only 18% of all cars and trucks. Why is that important? Because we're in the worst drug epidemic in our history. And drugs are flowing across our border in cars and trucks. I think all of us would agree, wouldn't we, Democrats and Republicans, if we can intervene when it comes to narcotics coming into the United States, stop them from coming in at the border, it's in the best interest of everybody in this nation. There is technology that makes sense. Count me in, and I'll bet you we get a strong bipartisan vote for it. And let me close by just saying this narcotics trail is a loop. It comes into the United States, but then what leaves the United States are drug money and weapons down to the cartels and gangs in Mexico and Central America. We're not checking for those. As they leave the United States, we could do a much better job in closing this loop once and for all and making this a safer country. Let me conclude by saying the President may be disappointed if we don't give him everything he's asked for, but if this Appropriations Committee did that, it would be a first in history. We're supposed to use our considered bipartisan judgment to make the right decision for the taxpayers and for the safety of this country. If the choice is between shut up or shut down, we've got to do our constitutional responsibility and avoid a shutdown and make sure we take a careful look at every president's request.
Thank you. Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairwoman Lowy, Chairwoman Roybal Allard, all of our conferees for your tremendous leadership. Also, let me just say how happy I am and pleased to be a part of this conference committee, and I want to thank Speaker Pelosi and, of course, yourself, Chairwoman Lowy, for this opportunity to weigh in on this very, very important issue. Let me first say that the recent shutdown cost families, including in my own district and your districts, needless pain and trauma. And I have heard from my constituents, like families in the Coast Guard and federal workers who I've met with, like you have, who feel like this shutdown was, quite frankly, a slap in the face. These are vital national security personnel and public servants who were put in a horrible and untenable position. And even though we have a temporary solution and resolution, temporary, families are still wondering if they will be able to count on future paychecks to pay the bills, feed their kids, and keep a roof over their heads. So I hope, and I do believe that there is a strong sense of urgency in this room today from members from both parties to finalize these remaining appropriations bills, most notably the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act. As some of you may know, I was born and raised in the wonderful border city of El Paso, Texas. And I understand very clearly the need to ensure that our borders are safe and secure. But I also know that we must maintain our values as Americans as we address border security, and building walls are antithetical to these values. We support effective 21st century and evidence-based border security, as you've heard, such as, of course, resources to meet the unique humanitarian needs of migrants, especially children and families, and equipment at ports of entry to detect drugs and new technology between ports of entry. Let me be clear. Contrary to President Trump's claims on drug smuggling, according to CBP and DEA, 90% of drug interdictions have occurred at the ports of entry, not between the ports. And building a wall would be useless and a waste of taxpayer dollars, since this won't even stop the majority of drugs coming into this country. But in addition to prioritizing border security, we must remember that the Coast Guard and FEMA are also important to our national security. And they would be significantly harmed through budget cuts if Congress funds the President's $5.7 billion in wall funding request. I want to be sure that Coast Guard families, for example, like the ones I've met with, are fully supported in this bill. And in California, of course, we've also been so deeply affected by the recent wildfires, especially Camp Fire last year. So we must continue to prioritize FEMA funding and personnel support to ensure that all of our communities can recover from the devastation of disasters. And so it's my hope that moving forward, we will be able to work together through this conference committee to address these key priorities. And Madam Chair, I'm recalling my very first conference committee was when Senator Byrd was chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he truly believed in the power of both sides coming together in a bipartisan way to resolve all of our country's serious issues. So thank you again very much, and thank all of you.
Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to you and also Chairman Shelby. Look, we've got to come to a border security package. We've got to figure it out. And if we can get that done, I think we can get these remaining appropriation bills done and fund the government through September 30th. There's a lot of bipartisanship in those bills. Compromise means both sides have to get something they need, right? Both sides have to be able to say, okay, we got something out of this agreement. The components of border security are people, technology, and a barrier. And everybody has voted for all three. We've all voted for all three. People, technology, and a barrier. Under President Clinton, 61.6 miles of barrier. Under President Bush, almost 500 miles of barrier. And under President Obama, 136.4 miles of barrier. So as we talk about our different parties, we're all saying, hey, we need a good border security package. Everyone has said that. Some people talk about technology. Some people talk about maritime, boats, and so forth. Some people talk about people, Senator Durbin. Some people talk about the need for a barrier. The point is to get to an agreement, we've got to have all three in there. I, too, talked to Commissioner McAleenan, who's head of the Customs and Border Protection, does an outstanding job, career professional. I asked him, I said, what should we do in terms of figuring this out? And what we talked about is listen to the professionals. Let's listen to the professionals. For example, he mentioned to me the head of the U.S. Border Patrol, Carla Provost, 24-year professional, career professional, 24 years with Border Patrol. Before that, she was with law enforcement. She's out there every day with her people on the line, putting their well-being on the line to protect us. Now, why don't we just ask her? Why don't we bring her in here or bring in Kevin? Let's bring in the career professionals and say, what do you need to do your job? Doesn't that take the politics out of it? So let's just ask them. Because I'm pretty sure what they're going to tell us is they're going to say, look, we need more barrier in the right configuration, in the right places. We need people and we need technology. And if we fund their priorities and work with them to make sure they spend the dollars as well as possible, we'll have a solution. So that's my strong recommendation, Madam Chairman, Mr. Chairman, is let's get those border security professionals, the career people from Customs and Border Protection and U.S. Border Patrol, and let's listen to them. This is part of keeping them safe while they're out there doing their job, keeping us safe. Thanks, Madam Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Congressman Cuellar.
First of all, with you and some of my former colleagues also, and Senator Tester, and I feel very optimistic as an appropriator. I know we can work this together. But let me give you just my perspective as I think the only member from the border that represents the border. I drink the water, breathe the air. I'm there. I don't just go visit for a few minutes and then say I've seen the border. Let me give you the state of the border when it comes to trade and tourism first. Every day between U.S. and Mexico, there is $1.3 billion of trade. Every day. That's over $1 million every single minute. Trade is very important. It touches everybody's states when we talk about trade. Mexican visitors consist, out of every 4 visitors that we get in the United States, 1 is from Mexico. A couple years ago, we had almost 19 million Mexicans that came over that spent over $20 billion, hotels, restaurants,
name it, they come in and spend a lot of money. So again, it's a dynamic place that we're at. Crime on the border, let me say that my hometown of Laredo is about 4 or 5 times safer than Washington, D.C. I'm not talking about the politics. I'm talking about FBI stats on rape, murder, assaults, and crime. The national crime rate is about 5.3 murders per 100,000. Laredo's 3.84 murders per 100,000, lower than the national crime rate. Any other border in town on the border will tell you the same thing. Washington, D.C. is 16.7 murders per 100,000. I'm going to mention some cities, but please excuse me, gentlemen, ladies. Mobile, Alabama, 20.1 murders per 100,000. Charleston, West Virginia, 20.50 murders per 100,000. Chattanooga, Tennessee, 17.3 murders per 100,000. Fort Worth, 8 murders per 100,000. 2 cities in my district, Roma and Rio Grande City, are among the 12 safest cities in the nation. They're right on the border in my district. Now, we talk about drugs. If you want to stop drugs, where do the most drugs come in? I think everybody said that. Ports of entry. You build a wall, they're going to go through a port of entry. Look at the drug case happening right now in New York. What do the bad guys say? We're going to go to port of entry. We're going to use cars. We're going to use vehicles. We're going to use trains. We're going to go through ports of entry or the U.S. Postal Service itself. So you can put a wall, but look at where they're coming in. Those X-ray portals, we have them in Laredo. They work. You can get an 18-wheeler. And by the way, Laredo handles 15,000 trailers a day. 15,000 trailers a day. And therefore, we need the latest technology that the commissioner talked about. It works. I've seen it, but we need to have it in other places. You want to stop people that come in and stay here? In 2000, how many people do we have? Border Patrol stopped 1.6 million individuals. Last year, it was 398,000. So it's about a quarter of the people that would come in. And 67% of the people that are here illegally came in through legal visas, overstays. By the way, most of them were Canadians. Now, I'm not saying to put a wall in the northern part of the nation, but I'm just saying this, you got to look at where people are coming in. Natural borders, if you would allow me to show a little, and I know this is not usual, but let me show you. In Texas, Texas has 1,200 out of the 1,954 miles with the U.S. Mexico. We have, for example, what they call in West Texas, Hertz District, God's Wall. 200, 300 feet of barrier there. That works right there. And if you look at it, the rest of it, we got in my district, for example, in the area that I just pointed out, we have a river that doesn't run straight. So basically, if I would be allowed, Mexico, the U.S., this is a river right here. So if you put a wall right here, the way they want to do it, you take away from eminent domain. People that have owned property for years and years and years. And if you look at this over here, usually Border Patrol will put up, they'll go up to about a mile into the territory because you can't flood the areas. So that means you're giving up. So if you have cattle, where are they going to drink water unless if you have a pond? Or if you have wildlife, anybody go hunting deer, where are they going to go drink water? So we have to look at it. Now notice this green vegetation here, over here. We got to go back to the basics itself. It's called carrizo cane, and I don't know if anybody knows. It's an invasive plant that grows higher than this ceiling right here. And if you look at there, there's a Border Patrol inside that invasive cane. It's bad for it because it sucks up so much water from the river. At the same time, it'll grow 18 to 20 feet high. You can't use cameras. You cannot use sensors. If you have airplanes or drones, it's going to be hard because they'll hide in there. Border Patrol wants to clear that invasive cane. And I've talked to the Mexicans. I don't want to speak for them, but they've said, we'll work with you. We'll work with you and clear the other side and the U.S. side. So you open up the river. You can put river roads there. You can put cameras, sensors, drones, cameras, aerostats, and we can provide them what they need. Now, finally, let me talk about cost effectiveness. On the average, this is on the fencing that we've added, 654 miles. I think last time there were mainly levee walls. I think 33 miles total, 25 and 8, 33 miles. So if you add 654 and add 33, that gives us, if once this 33 miles are built, 687 miles. To meet President Bush, the Fence Act, all we need is 13 miles, and we meet what the president asked. We can't keep moving the goalpost over. But on the average, fences cost approximately $25 million per mile. $25 million. You add 1 mile of technology, compare it, $1 to $2 million. $25 million, $1 to $2 million for technology. And if you ask every single patrol chief, and I've asked them this in appropriations, Bush, Obama's, Trump, including Trump's, how much time does a wall buy you? They all have said, quote, a few minutes or a few seconds, depending who wants to cross over. Tunnel, catapults, put billions of dollars, I'll buy you a $100 ladder, and I'll take care of that wall quickly. Anybody see the CBP video last week where they had 110 Central Americans who were just jumping over with the fence? They had a ladder over there. Finally, experts, and I love Border Patrol. I want to give them a pay raise reform. I want to give them retention bonuses to keep them. They need it. They really need it. But I always ask the question, they said pre or post 2012? Because if it was before 2012, their official position was building a fence or a wall along the border to stop illegal immigration would be, quote, wasting taxpayers' dollars. Because they can tunnel, they can climb over, or go around a fence. So I always ask, is it pre-2012 or pre-20? There was a new group of people that came in. But we do need to listen to them. I agree. I agree with the chairwoman that our position is strong border, effective border security that matches the criminal organizations. They got the money, they're creative, and we got to be able to match what they want. Technology, drones, cameras, increased personnel, canines, retention bonuses to give Border Patrol, because we're losing more Border Patrol than we're hiring. We're not even at the high. We were at 21,370. Right now, we're 22 below. And when we talk about judges, we've been working on judges for about 4 years. We've been adding judges. Problem is, right now, we got about 484 judges, but we only got 426 courtrooms, so we need courtrooms also. Finally, let me just say this. The proposal that we have is multifaceted. We do it, and I think we can work in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start by expressing my thanks to all the members of the Appropriations Committee on both the House and the Senate for your hard work. And while I believe we should have loved to have finished consideration of the bill prior to the end of the 115th Congress and avoided the partial government shutdown, I know that everyone around the table is ready to put pen to paper and to avoid a second shutdown and come up to a solution that we can all accept. Let's make no mistake, the American people are watching us. Heck, the world is watching us to see if we can come together and govern responsibly and work towards a solution. And at the risk of repeating much of what has already been said, in my mind, we have 3 goals to achieve. And although the details may differ between us right now, I hope we can come to a consensus. We must secure our border. We must address the humanitarian crisis at our border, and we must keep the government open. I believe that we all have come here in good faith and feel confident that the solution is here. We, as the elected officials of this country, must be willing to find that solution. And Madam Chair, before I yield back, I would like to just expand on what Senator Hoeven said. You know, I think it'd be a great idea to hear from the professionals, have them, the lifetime professionals, people on the front lines that know this issue better than anybody in this U.S. Congress, and hear from them. But if we can't get them to come to us, why don't we go to them? Why don't we go to the border and see firsthand? I know Congress Cuellar, Laredo's on my list, and see firsthand. And I'd hope I'd hope the chairwoman would approve such travel and do it sooner than later so we can get to the people's business. So with that, I yield back.
Congressman Aguilar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. It's an honor to serve on this conference committee and to have an opportunity to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in both chambers to address critical issues affecting the Department of Homeland Security. We have an opportunity before us to build on and improve our national security through a bill that will come out of this conference. One of the best ways to improve security along the border is through the use of technology. Last Congress, I had the privilege of negotiating a bipartisan border security compromise with our Republican colleague from Texas, Will Hurd. The compromise had broad bipartisan support and called for an evidence-based approach to border security, an assessment of what's actually needed, which is what I'm hearing all of my colleagues talk about, to secure each linear mile on the southern border, because each mile is different, as Senator Tester mentioned. The evidence has shown us that a coast-to-coast border wall is neither practical nor effective towards securing our borders. We've seen that walls can and will be tunneled under, cut through, or scaled. We cannot focus on archaic solutions in order to address this very modern problem. Technology works for securing this border. The fact of the matter is that our law enforcement officials along the border are not currently equipped with the technology they need to effectively secure and stop drug smuggling. As Senator Durbin mentioned, we need to ensure that we have the capabilities needed to scan more vehicles at ports of entry, rather than the 1.3% of privately owned vehicles and 17% of commercial vehicles that are being scanned today. We need to ensure that utilizing smart sensors and other technology to detect the differences between humans and animals moving across the border. That is the approach taken by House Democrats' position in what we're putting forward. We have significant investments in technologies that will work, like scanning vehicles at ports of entry, equipment to detect opioids, and other worthwhile investments that are sensible uses of tax dollars. I hope we can remain focused on that modern, common-sense approach as we work together to reach a compromise over these next few weeks. Maybe we won't have enough time to do show and tell, as Mr. Palazzo mentioned, but I look forward to digging in as well. We only have a few short weeks to come to an agreement, so I ask my colleagues here to work seriously to put forward a conference report that makes sense, uses taxpayer dollars effectively and wisely, and prevents further shutdowns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any amendments from House members? Yes, Senator Shelby.
Madam Chair, I just want to say that I think everybody's spoken here, I hope, at the beginning today, that we can work together. I think this has been a good start. We've got differences, but we can bridge these differences. I think you got to have to, as Senator Hoeven said and others have, that we got to have a comprehensive approach to this. Technology is important, but I think some fences or some other things are important too. We've got to just listen to the professionals. We've got to do this. We can't make a decision up here. We've got to get what works and what will work and get this job done. And I believe you will work toward that end.
Well, Senator Shelby, it's always a pleasure working with you. I thank you very much for your comments. And if there are no amendments, I want to thank everyone for your participation today. I look forward to working with you over the next several weeks. And if there is no further discussion and there are no motions, the conference is in recess, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.
Somebody get you something.